Security was very tight. What impressed me is how well the guard, the members of the guard were dressed. I understood that much of the cloth came from the United States. The boots came also from the United States, because we were furnishing a lot of equipment to Russia ever since the Nazis took over, invaded the country. And when we were assisting, of course, Soviet Russia in the fight against Germany. Here it is in the conference room. Before sitting down to the conference, every time they came in, they picked up the agenda for the day.
You know, in the beginning, Stalin studied in a seminary.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
A Christian seminary,
Yeah,
and then he rejected Christ.
That's right, he dropped out. Did you know, by the way, and I didn't know it until very recently, that Stalin was actually an illegitimate son of a Russian aristocrat, a landlord, and a servant girl.
Mm-hmm.
And the landlord bribed a cobbler, a shoe cobbler, to marry the girl. And that was Stalin's father, stepfather. When he was in school, he was chided about that. They have a Russian expression, sukin sin, which is translated bastard. Later, I also read somewhere that he killed his real father, the landlord, when he was about 14 or 15 years of age. And here is the conference table at which the three delegations met and made decisions, rather, of great importance affecting Europe as well as Asia. Decisions which are affecting us even today. President Roosevelt is sitting right in front of us. On his right is Stettinius, his Secretary of State. On his left is the interpreter Charles Bolin, who later became ambassador to Soviet Russia. Man who spoke Russian very well. He's a graduate of Harvard, specialized in Russian language, and was sent to Moscow for his first assignment in the diplomatic service. Back of us is the Russian delegation. There is Stalin, Molotov, Vyshinsky, the Russian ambassador to England, Maisky, and some other. There's Leahy sitting right next to Stettinius, naval commander. There's Hopkins right back of the president, Harry Hopkins. He was pro-Soviet in his views. Also back of the president was Alger Hiss, who later was tried for turning over papers to Soviet Russia, secret papers, and served a prison term. Also back of the president was the head of the political department, the State Department, Matthew Freeman.
Was Roosevelt, he must have had a great deal of self-confidence at that point because he just won his fourth election. He must have felt...
Definitely he was self-confident. And I have a feeling that the reason for his going in an open Jeep was his wanting for the populace who turned out by the thousands of them to see him in person. And that's why he wanted to ride in an open Jeep. I can't imagine anybody riding an open Jeep in that kind of weather. Every day for 8 days, these delegations met. James Burns, sitting next to Charlie Bolin, who was next to the president, took notes. He was the only one who took shorthand notes, and they were available. They were published later on in the U.S. News World Report. Not all of them. There were a lot of pages have been censored and are missing, so we don't know all of the facts. Here was Churchill with his daughter Sarah. Churchill's the only one that really had a smile on his face, with a cigar frequently in his mouth most of the time. He amused me in a way.
You know, I've watched what happened here. You know, you had millions of people from Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, which then later broke away a little bit. All of them suddenly put under the heel of Russia in one fortnight, really. And don't you think that if this was just an honest mistake, it would have they would have made one mistake in our favor? It didn't seem like there was any benefit to humankind out of this.
But you've got to understand also that agreements were made at Yalta, where Stalin, he agreed that he was going to hold free elections. Now, this is what I say, is that we trusted Stalin too much.
But he did hold free elections.
Despite the experience from 1928 on, or you might say from the very beginning of the communist regime in Russia, November 1917, how could we have trusted an individual like Stalin?
Yeah.
And this is what I call the gullibility of Roosevelt, you see, of putting his trust. Well, you say they had elections. They were not free elections. They were controlled elections.
You're right.
And it was obvious to me, at least, that they were not going to follow through on free elections.
Of course, didn't Stalin, and you can correct me here, and I'm sure you know better than I do, but didn't Stalin say that all he had to have in a country was the head of the internal police, and the country would be his within a few years? And that's what he did in Czechoslovakia.
Well, that was true. That was true in Russia from the very beginning. You might say, you know, the organization of the NKVD, the MVD, and then of course the KGB, which is of course the present secret police, and the same kind of a situation exists in every country which is under Soviet control.
So he sounded very humble. He said, "Just give me one cabinet post, the head of the secret police.
That's right.
And you take everything else."
Well,
but from that one post, Ortega in Nicaragua was originally head of the police.
That's correct. That's correct.
And from that post, of course, because what can you do when the police starts hauling you off into the camps?
Well, you've got to remember that every communist country is a police state.
So how long are we going to fall for that trick?
Well, of course, I have a feeling personally that there's going to be some change in the next 15, 20 years in Russia. I think Russian history tells us that a time comes when the cup runneth over. Russian history is replete with attempts to overthrow the government.
How long did Roosevelt live after Yalta?
Exactly 6 weeks.
So really,
he died on the 12th of April, 1945. Interestingly enough, when I came back, I had been a voter in Texas, and I used to go quite often on the Hill to eat lunch with the members of Congress. They knew that I had been assigned to Yalta, several members of Congress. So when I came back, they asked me to come and have luncheon. And during the luncheon, I think it was Lyndon Johnson, who was then representative from Texas, turned to me. He says, "Joe," I've known him, of course, for many, many years when he was a school teacher in Houston where I lived. He says, "Joe, we understand the president was not in very good health at Yalta." I said, "That's right." And then I ventured this statement after I telling them, you know, what his condition, the way I impression that I got, you know. And I said, if I had the nerve, I'd go to see Truman right now and tell him to be ready to become president in no time, because I doubt very much whether the president is going to live another 60 to 90 days. I said, I'm not a medical man, but I can look at a man and see. I said that he's worn out. He looked like a skeleton. And sure enough, I saw him on March the 1st, the last time when he addressed the joint session of Congress. And the next morning he left for Warm Springs.